think about the world around us, we often lend our imaginations the assistance of an objective point of view, which is simulated and does not in fact exist. This is just a fancy way of saying there's no such thing as normal. After all, what does it really mean to be another person? Well, not nothing to you who should be fairly similar in most respects. But on the way to reconstructing someone else's perspective, there are obstacles that get in the way. You know what I mean? Necessarily, you don't know what I mean. Not in the sense that you are sharing the experience of having this idea as myself, but you can make your own approximation using your memories and experiences, which once again should be fairly similar to mine. But of course, there are plenty differences. In order to overcome this gap between isolated phenomena, one mind and another mind, we have developed scientific disciplines, various kinds of technology, and religious and philosophical interpretations of fact. Using these tools and ways of seeing the world, we've constructed a loose but workable, objective viewpoint, which I will devote some time to convincing you does not actually exist. There is no such thing as objectivity. The concept of an objective view of reality inevitably exists within the mind. Although there are objective facts, things that are reliable, testable, and repeatable, like gravity. If you drop a penny off a building, you can calculate exactly how fast it's going to fall, give or take due to wind resistance, but even the wind resistance can be measured, and so that's why we have physics and math to tell us what's going to happen when you do something. We all can agree on that, well, most of us. This is not something I'm trying to debate or call into question, as my line of thinking here is purely philosophical. There is a central question, and that is, what can you not verify? Qualia are the subjective properties that determine the conscious aspect of experience. How it feels when you shimmy your fingers together, or what an apple tastes like. These are qualities that are impossible to just describe. You always have to relate them to something else or do an as-if like comparison. I just took a sip of my coffee, and I could tell you, who's never had coffee, that it tasted bitter and robust. Well, you couldn't just bring yourself to understand the taste of the coffee by explanation. You would have to have the experience yourself, and even then, is my bitter the same, qualitatively, as your bitter? What's important to consider here is not even whether or not you like coffee. I like bees 10 hours, and you might not, but when you hear the sound, does it even sound the same to you? I wouldn't know. There are ways to measure, as I stated earlier, and in the case of sound, your brain determines how you hear different frequencies, not just your ears, but also the auditory cortex. The name for this channel actually comes from an auditory illusion where, depending on how you perceive frequencies, you hear a different name being spoken.
Laurel, 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 laurel.
But can mental states be fully explained by physical processes such as this? I think that the question of whether or not we have free will hints at the opacity of objectivity, because it's not really black and white. The nature of choice is elusive. Some choices can be reduced down to processes in the brain, but for many that's not so simple. How much of your environment contributes to who you are? Nature versus nurture. If there is a way to map everything in the brain, you could identify the specific regions responsible for each moment of sensory stimulation, and you would still be no closer to knowing how the sense felt, unless you had felt it. The measurement is always the measurement and never the thing itself, which cannot be communicated, or at least not fully.
Hey, did you know birds use the Earth's magnetic field for gravity?
Birds, especially migratory species like warblers and pigeons, can detect the Earth's magnetic field and use it to navigate long distances. This ability is known as magnetoreception. Magnetoreception is a quantum biological process where quantum physics occurs within a living organism. Light-sensitive proteins in birds' retina undergo quantum electron transfer reactions when hit by light. The spin states of the electrons are influenced by the Earth's magnetic field, subtly changing the output signal. So birds might literally see magnetic fields, and this isn't the only way they guide themselves when they migrate, but I wonder what those magnetic fields would look like. Do they just kind of shimmer around in the air, or what's that about? Bees see ultraviolet, and that's cool too. Electromagnetic pollution from power lines, radio towers, and even cell phones can disrupt bird magnetoreception. This is why it's important to think about this whole topic, because if you were to use only your senses and not consider that there could be another perspective that is fundamentally different, trouble arises, especially if you don't speak the same language as the other parties involved. Speaking of languages, the languages we speak not only shape how we communicate, but also influence how we perceive, remember, and emotionally process the world. Different languages engage distinct neural networks, and bilingual individuals often show increased cognitive flexibility. Some languages emphasize spatial relationships or time differently, altering how speakers mentally organize these concepts. Additionally, emotional resonance can differ between languages. This is why puns don't always work when you try to translate them, because the word associations are not there for one person or group. And this changes over time due to social and cultural shifts. So then I ask you, if the language that you speak, the primary tool you use for describing your own subjective experiences, is shaped by external events and things you couldn't have predicted, then what of objectivity? What of the objective view, which exists and has existed only in the minds of individuals, or maybe only in your mind, and this is all a simulation? The development of ideas, cultural icons, and popular symbols is a chaotic system. It is effectively unpredictable. The idea of scientific inquiry, objective facts versus subjective perceptions, these ideas themselves are a part of this constantly shifting system. How things will progress from here, no one knows. It's not completely deterministic. Newtonian physics, which we use for mechanical applications like flying spacecraft, is deterministic. Quantum mechanics sort of breaks determinism in a way. You can only calculate the probability of where a particle will be, not exactly predict it. So then, where does objectivity lie when you exist in a universe where you can't objectively predict every interaction between agents? Some systems are deterministic but chaotic, meaning a small change in initial conditions could lead to wildly different outcomes. Weather systems are chaotic. If you can predict the exact outcome of a storm, it's very difficult. You would need a computer more powerful than anything we have today, which is why you only ever get an approximation when you check the weather for the week. The existence of an objective reality doesn't necessarily imply determinism per se, just that there is one thing there, and that the overall composition of the fabric of reality doesn't depend on your subjective viewpoint. But what if it does? In quantum mechanics, the observation of a particle does influence the results, with some considerations there because it's very complicated and I am not a quantum physicist by any stretch of the imagination. Nonetheless, this exemplifies the lack of a static objective state that everything exists in, because where is that quantum particle when it's not being observed? Every frame of reference alters truth in some way. Records of events are subject to cultural perceptions at the time and place they were taken. That then has to be translated elsewhere, oftentimes many years later, and a lot of meaning can be lost in translation. So, when we talk about objective realities, do we really mean collective subjective realities or the average of all human perspectives? You could say science is the bridge between our subjective experiences and what is certain. You may be a spiritual or religious person, and that defines your view of what is objectively real. But outside of the human perspective, we don't have any reports on how it feels to perceive what we can't, how it feels to navigate using the Earth's magnetic fields, or see in ultraviolet. And I don't speak B, but if I could, I'd ask what that was like.